Hello and welcome to a very brief history of advertising in the US. And we're only going to go up through the introduction of television to give you a bit of a context as to what we'll be looking at the rest of the semester, which is, of course, contemporary advertising by and large. But I wanted to give you something to think about in terms of how this all evolved. And one of the things I did was to assign you a timeline. And what you're looking at is a different timeline, but they both begin with the early Egyptians. And I want to suggest that for our purposes, what we consider advertising really begins in about the middle of the 19th century, so the 1850s or thereabouts. Before advertising and the branding of products became popular, people would go to general stores, for example, or to specialty stores like a blacksmith if their horse needed looking after, or a cobbler if their shoes needed tending. But for most day-to-day goods, they would go to a general store. And once inside, they would ask for flour, and they'd get it, or nails, and they'd get it. There weren't different types of flour or brands to choose from. You'd basically pretty much got what you needed without the brand name. And in about 1850 in the United States, P.T. Barnum and at about the same time, Wild Bill Cody would have shows that they would put on, and they would advertise these heavily in the towns by putting posters in windows or getting billboards or even advertising in magazines. And here we have an advertisement for the so-called Fiji mermaid, which sounds and looks very exotic indeed. But what you got was something a little bit different than was promised. And this has always kind of been the tension with advertising. What you see is not necessarily what you get. The Fiji mermaid, and you can probably get a better sense of it here, was a concoction that took a fish's back half and melded that together, sewed it literally together with a mummified monkey in the top half, and you got this kind of hideous attraction that was part of the P.T. Barnum show. And Barnum's show was really pretty spectacular, like the advertisement here suggests. And here the focus is on the huge elephant, Jumbo, which was traveled around the country. And even after the death of Jumbo, Barnum was able to sell the bones of the creature. It's interesting, Barnum is noted for saying a couple of things. One is which there is a sucker born every minute, and the other is that no one ever lost $1 by underestimating the taste of the American public. So he had a very kind of grim view of the capacity of the human to make good choices, a very dim view of the public. At about the same time, so-called patent medicine began to make its way into the consciousness of America through advertising, and snake oil liniment was one such thing. And so you've probably heard the term, oh, that's just snake oil. And snake oil became associated with a sham or with smoke and mirrors or things that didn't really do as advertised. And you can see why. Here, as on the left-hand side, snake oil promises to cure pretty much everything. And patent medicine basically was often usually alcohol with some other stuff thrown in. And the term patent medicine means that you could take a patent out on the contents of the medicine, but you didn't need a prescription to sell it or to buy it. And so this was pretty much unmoderated stuff, oftentimes sold from the backs of these traveling salesmen who would put on little shows, medicine shows as they were called, and people would come out of the audience and claim to have cancer, and they'd be cured by Doc Wassels and so forth. I can't walk, and they'd take a sip and they'd be cured and so forth. And so the advertisements of this particular era were ones that probably wouldn't fly today. So, for example, for cocaine toothache drops, and showing some kids obviously being able to play thanks to the instantaneous cure. Other concoctions that promised to make children fat as pigs during a time when people were going hungry. And also, I love this one, Dr. Batty's asthma cigarettes. Effectively treats asthma, hay fever, foul breath. I'm just wondering what they were smoking when they came up with this. But in any case, a different form of advertising was born in 1897. This is the cover of the first Sears Roebuck catalog. And basically, Sears Roebuck catalog sold everything you needed. It was kind of like a general store and more brought to your home. And one interesting component of these ads is that you'll notice there's a lot of text, particularly with the electric washer, a lot explaining what was going on with this product, because up until this point, people would wash their clothes by hand. And so why, they would wonder, would I need something that would cost as much as $92, which is about $2,000 in today's currency, to do this for me? And so there was a lot of explanation about what this product was and how it worked and so forth. And so there was an appeal to the rational mind. And Sears Roebuck even sold homes. So they would come to your house and actually come to what would become your house, the space on which a house would be built. And there were several models to choose from, and voila. Some of these still are in existence, and so if you're interested, you might want to Google the houses that Sears built back at the turn of the century. One really important change that began in the 1800s was the introduction of monthly and then weekly magazines. And these became tremendously popular, so that what were once monthly became weekly. And basically, you would get, for example, writers like Mark Twain or Edgar Allan Poe serializing their fiction, so that you'd have to buy every week to find out how the story concluded or went on. And so these became very popular to the public and also very popular for advertisers. And Pear's Soap was one such advertiser that really had a kind of high profile in these magazines, and their advertisements became really very famous. So that when their magazines went to color in about 1910, the advertisers also went to color. And this ad is actually, again, for Pear's Soap, but really kind of modern in a way, because there's very little text. It leaves the image to kind of suggest the quality of the product that we're not really exactly sure what it is. But this particular ad became notorious. It was cut out and put up on walls of houses and so forth, and it really got reproduced on tins, and it became very, very, very popular. Pear's Soap is still made today, although it's nothing close to what it was as a product in the time of this ad. But in any case, with the introduction of color and the cheapness of reproducing magazines for the public, they just proliferated, and lifestyles begin to change quite dramatically. And so some of this is reflected in the content of the magazines. You see, for example, with the Life magazine cover in the lower left, the kind of flapper lifestyle that was going on. You see the importance of motion pictures with Motion Picture Magazine in the upper right-hand corner and so forth. And so this lifestyle was heavily kind of promoted. And with radio, you had another vehicle for advertising being opened up. And radios became very popular, in fact, and much like the magazines before them, would serialize stories like soap operas, which were literally brought to you by soap companies, therefore the name. And once movies were able to combine synchronized sound to the film, their already strong popularity took off. And you can see from the inside of this theater built in the 20s that they were really quite extravagant. And even if there wasn't a lot of advertising done in the theaters themselves, there were a lot of magazines that were built around film stars. And in these, you would find advertisements. And some of them, as you can see, are really kind of visually interesting. All these are from film journals of the time and kind of instructive in terms of telling you how you should look, what beauty means. We'll get into this later in the semester in more detail. But movie stars themselves would often be used to sell the products. This is Dorothy Lamour, who was a famous actor through the 40s, in fact, and selling Lux soap. And here's Al Jolson, who was star of The Jazz Singer, the first sound synchronized feature-length film, selling Lucky Strike cigarettes. And you can see an image from him in blackface. We're going to get into race and advertising later in the semester too, and selling Lucky Strike cigarettes. So this whole idea of beauty and fitting in and conformity and consumer culture all kind of fit together. And so magazine advertisements and advertisements on the radio, in fact, began to kind of sell this idea of what it meant to be beautiful, what it meant to be handsome, and how to achieve those goals. And so one of the things that was popular was the idea of dieting. So you had to be a certain weight. And so here you see for Lucky Strike, to keep a slender figure, reach for a cigarette instead of a sweet. And these notions that were kind of crazy to our eyes, kind of going back to the snake oil days, would pop up in certain newspapers where you could use, for example, the curves of youth to make yourself look younger. Or you can use soap, again, to wash away fat, which of course is absurd. But also this idea of monitoring yourself, to scrutinize yourself for flaws, began to become popular with advertisement. And so here you see two ads for Listerine. The first, how's your breath today? If it's bad, you won't be welcome. And so this idea of public shame was brought to bear with Listerine advertisements. And the one on the right maybe brings it home more strongly. The one true friend she has, and it's a canary, right? And it's a canary, we learn, because she has bad breath. And so for men, the same product would be used differently. So you've got this comparison with the ad on the left, this or this. And so a happy-go-lucky guy wearing his tux, or the same guy in a hospital because he didn't use Listerine, presumably as an aftershave. And again, like snake oil, Listerine worked primarily because it had alcohol in it. Or dandruff, like we have with the ad on the right. So this is the manly use of Listerine. But still, there were those ads like this one, which this poor cop who's giving a ticket to a woman driver, very 20s, and she made a crack about his breath, evidently, the story tells us. And so, again, this idea of public shame, that if you have bad breath, you better take care of it, if not through Listerine, then maybe through Colgate. One of these is bound to work, right? But making it more and more difficult in a culture that was becoming more and more public, going to the movies together, listening to the radio together, going out and dancing and so forth, much more urban focused, and therefore the possibility for shame more strong. And so different kind of problems had to be addressed and really, in a way, invented. And this is an advertisement, and there were so many that came out of the 20s through the 40s about body odor, or BO, as it was more daintily. I'm not exactly sure why it became abbreviated, but a shame. And so this poor woman, sorry, but this poor woman notices that every time she goes to the party, they open up the windows because she smells so badly. And luckily, she has a aunt who can tell her that, well, dear, the problem is that you need to wash more regularly with Lifebuoy soap, and that'll save you from the shame. And if it's not BO, it's SA, stocking appeal. And you can see the husband looking down with some discouragement at his wife's run in her stocking. And so again, this idea of making you feel uncomfortable about yourself in some way is still a real popular way of getting us to buy stuff, but was really exploded in the 1920s. Looming on the horizon, however, was this. And this is a 12-inch screen mass-produced television set, which cost $7,000 in today's money back in 1938. And it came complete with a 12-inch screen with really low resolution, terrible quality, and very little on. But very quickly, the television boom after World War II in particular really exploded. And so I apologize for the poor graphic here, but you can see in 1950, only 9% of households had TVs. A year later, that jumped to almost 25%. So the prices dropped dramatically. Television shows were becoming more popular and available, and more production was going into them. And by 1978, 98% of the households have them, and we're really close to 100% today. So we'll have more to say about that, obviously, soon. And so I hope this gives you some kind of context for the reading and for the videos we'll be watching for this unit. And I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation and that you'll feel free to ask if you have any questions. So until next time, onward, and I'll look forward to hearing from you. Take care.